Today on the Business Builders podcast, we're continuing our effective networking series and exploring how to go about improving your results. So in this episode, we discuss a 4-stage improvement process that includes identifying what you need to improve, designing an alternative approach, practicing a new approach, and reinforcing the new behavior. Well, welcome to the Business Builders podcast. We are your hosts. I am Brenton Gowland.
And I'm Ron Tomlin.
And we are coming to the end today, Ron, of our series about effective networking.
Except for the fact that we're going to be talking to a few people who are practitioners of good networking.
Yes.
Yeah, but in terms of the approach, today's the last day.
Yes. And we hope you've been enjoying it. If you've been listening, if you've just come in and this is your first episode, or you've got the ability to enjoy 4 other episodes before. So before we get into today, we might just do a review of what we've done so far. So Ron, what have we done for the effective networking series so far?
So we've said in terms of developing your networking, first look at your purpose. Why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Then plan what you intend to do and why you intend to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Then look at actually doing it. You've got to implement this stuff. You've got to get out there and network.
Mm-hmm.
Review what you've done. And as we're going to talk about today, how do you improve your networking? What's the process for improving your networking?
Yep. So they're the steps that we've kind of put forward as being how to go out and to effectively network. And just quickly, they are purpose, plan, do, review, and today is improve. So we're going to start with our sponsors and then we'll get stuck into it.
There's SA Business Builders.
Indeed, we had a event last week and it was a very small event. We only had about 12 people, but it was some great conversations. And I think we've got an end-of-year event coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yep, and if we always say this, if you're listening internationally, we just encourage you to go out and network because it's great for building, it was exactly what we're talking about at the moment, but great for building your capacity to get things done when you've got a large network. In SA Business Builders, it's all about bringing great people together with no agenda, just to talk, get to know each other, and add people to their network.
Yes, and Adaptco, that's you.
Which is me, and I feel like I'm in proposal season at the moment. No marriage proposals, just proposals for business. So what I do is I go and help people sort out their marketing. Usually I help them get unstuck, and I do that by the application of marketing strategy, business strategy, and help them build their capability in the marketing area of their business. So that is Adaptco.
Very good.
Indeed. And now we get on to the improve part. So again, we talked about earlier that the stages we've gone through are define your purpose. So purpose, plan, do, review, and today is improve. So if you just want to, as we've done with the other episodes, Ron, if you just want to go through the structure that we're going to go through today, what are our 4 points that help us focus on improving our results?
Well, firstly, identify, design, practice, and reinforce. And of course, our whole podcast is about explaining what we're talking about there. So yeah. I'll let you start with identify.
Yeah, well, firstly, just before we do get into I just kind of want to highlight that this whole aspect of improving yourself is probably, in a sense, the hardest part of the whole process that we've gone through, in the sense that you're looking to change behaviors. And how easy is it to change behaviors, Ron?
It's difficult.
Yes.
Talk to someone who knows it's difficult to change your own behaviors. And here we're talking about changing your own behaviors, not anyone else's.
Correct. So it takes self-discipline. And the first 4 steps, part of it is going out. We talked about last week about the review process. We go and find people who can give us feedback. We make observations. The idea is to identify areas in what we are doing when we're networking that can improve. And I think you said on the last episode that if we identify the root cause of why we're doing something that is causing us to maybe not get the results we're after based on the purpose that we set out for when we talked about what's our purpose for networking, then if we can identify that root cause, we can do something about it, right?
Absolutely.
So this first step today in the approve process is to identify those things. So in the review process that we talked about last week, we talked about, again, seeking feedback, making observations, recording what we observed and the feedback we got, and then reflecting and perhaps finding if there's a behavioral challenge, finding what that is. The behavioral challenge might be you just don't listen. Or I think we were talking before, pre-chat about the fact that some people have this habit of just rocking up late all the time and it's an ingrained behavior. I don't know anyone like that, do you?
Well, don't look at me.
I'm not. I'm probably looking at myself. I'm a just-in-time arriver. I think I got to change that because you sweat when you arrive just in time. So that's a behavior I got to change. But the point is that when you can identify something that's a behavior that has to be changed, why am I arriving late? What's going on? How is it? It's much more than just saying, hey, I'm going to arrive on time from now on. No. You got to go back and find out what's going on. So the point of identifying is once you've done what we did in the review process, recording and reflecting, you make a list. The list is the things that you recognize that you can improve. And when you start doing this process, you might have a few things. You might have, let's go back to what I just said. I'm arriving late. I'm not listening. I keep cutting people off. My elevator pitch needs improvement. I've got a few aesthetic things, like I've got to polish my shoes like we talked about the other week, or I've got to bring Tic Tacs. Those little things are easy, but it's the behavioral change things that are hard. So when you've written your list of these are the things I've got to work on, I also really encourage that people rank them in order of what is going to get me the best result quickest and the best, in a sense, bang for my improvement buck. And I would say for me, out of those three, it's the listening one. People will forgive you the first and second time you're late, and they might jump on the bandwagon in the third time and say, you do that again and I'm not going to bother turning up or whatever. But you got a bit of grace there. You got a bit of grace with other things, but the not listening to people will go, they don't care. So I would rank the listening thing for myself. I'd make my list. I got my 3, 4, 5 things, whatever they are that I've observed that I got to change. Even the elevator pitch, I'd still rank that lower. I'd rank number 1. I got to learn to listen to people. And once you've done that, that's what I would then focus on for the next at least 30 days, because it takes at least 30 days to change a behavior.
Well, let me ask you the question. If you've got 2 or 3 things, why can't you work on all of them at once?
Because it will be very difficult to effectively establish a new behavior. If you want to establish a new behavior, they say it takes 30 days. That's what the research says, at least 30 days to establish a behavior. And secondly, if you're trying to work on 3 behaviors at once, it's just going to be so hard. It's better to focus on one thing because there's going to be all these different nuances to listening, for example, because active listening also means asking questions.
So the simple answer is focus.
Focus on one thing at a time, because you're not going to change overnight. You're not going to make these things better. But if you can make incremental improvements in what you're doing, then over time, incremental improvements become quite significant improvements.
That's right. So focus on one thing and design, the second idea, design an alternative approach.
Yep. So once you've got your list, you then want to think about how you can change this behavior. And this does come to the question we talked about before. Why am I not listening? What's driving that behavior? And there's all sorts of things you can do to look at driving those behaviors that are outside the scope of what we're going to be talking about here, because, you have to analyze what's in my personality, what's in my makeup that's making me talk over the top of people. Like we have a person that we both know who very openly says that gets very excited and has to really work on listening. Otherwise he'll be bouncing around the room and annoying people, and other people have to bring him back to earth. So he knows that about himself and he recognizes he has to change it.
And he can't change it until he recognizes it. But once he has, he needs to do something about it.
Yeah. And that once you've recognized it, you start to annoy yourself and that's a good thing, really. If you go out and you catch yourself talking over the top of someone, you'll think, oh boy, I've done it again. You might go a bit down on yourself or whatever, or you might remind yourself to stop and listen. But this is where this design part comes in. You need to design what you're going to do differently, what that habit is that you're going to establish or put into the mix that's going to cause you to be able to go somewhere and actively listen. And we talked about the other week that methodology I learned from someone in my network, which was the traffic light mechanism. Now that's one mechanism. So I would have...
Just as a reminder, take me through that again.
Oh, okay. So the traffic light mechanism is where when I talk to someone, I literally imagine a traffic light, set of 3 lights. A traffic light is a red light, an amber light, and a green light. And I imagine that when they're talking, the red light is firmly on. And I will picture it in my head that the red light is on. When they stop talking, I move to amber. And when it's amber, that means reflect to me and decide, do I make a comment? Do I say something in response, or do I ask another question? So I make that decision during the amber, and I might be silent for 1 or 2 seconds, and they'll see that I'm thinking. Then I will speak once I've made that decision. And that's done me really well because, sometimes the red light will go off when they stop talking, and you'll be on amber thinking, what do I do? Do I do this? Do I do that? But they'll start speaking again, and you haven't cut them off, and they keep going with their thought. Because the fact is, when you're networking, depending on what your purpose is, the more someone else talks, the more you learn. And then the more you have to be able to further that relationship if you choose to do so later.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're getting information on what's relevant to them and how in your communication you can pitch it to something that is relevant to them.
So my design part might be that I'm going to use that traffic light mechanism. There's 100 other different things you can do. You might do some research online.
And I don't think you should ever underestimate the power of asking other people what they've done. Get ideas from what other people have done. If you've noticed that somebody is listening better, how did you do that?
Yeah.
So don't underestimate that as a source of inspiration for the activities that you can undertake to improve that behavior.
And also observations. When you observe people who are very good at listening, I have noticed that people who are particularly good will block other people out if they're listening to someone talking. Now, I'm not necessarily thinking that's the right approach. I might be the type of person who, and literally they'll ignore people or whatever. And I've watched that and gone, I might have a hybrid version and just say, excuse me, I'm talking. Give me a moment. Let John or Jeff or Joan finish what she's saying. And then we'll talk. But just pause for a moment. That's me. I'm not the type of person who will actively ignore. But I observe other people and I'll go, does that work? Does that not work? So observation is great as well. But again, back to the point, you need to design, this is what I'm going to do to try and change this behavior. So I'm going to actively, when I go out and talk to people, I'm going to use this all the time. And you might need to, I would say you need to commit to doing something like that for about 30 days. But I would have a reminder. I'd write it down. I'd have it in my wallet. I'd have it on my phone, like as a screensaver. And I would just have a stoplight on my phone.
And I think during this phase, it's a good idea to look at what measures I could be looking at to ensure that behavior is being met. Is it the number of times that during an event that I have actively listened and aim for 100%? Is it the number of times that I've seen the traffic light in front of me when I've visualized it and worked towards 100%? Having measures gives you the opportunity to say, is this working or isn't it working?
Well, that's really interesting, actually, because I use my phone a lot. You've noticed that I take notes on my phone when I'm out.
Yeah.
I'll learned a long time ago, tell people that you're actually taking notes and not doing SMSs because they'll wander sometimes. Doesn't matter what they say. I always go, I'm just taking notes, just so you know. Anyway, if you do what you just said there, you could actually have like a tally system or some app. I'm sure you can find something where when you're talking to people, you go tick, tick, and actively as you're going, tick a box that shows that you've actually done that thing. And at the end of the day, you can go, I talked to 20 people and actually 19 of them, I used the traffic light mechanism. Well, I'm almost there. I can probably get to 20.
And that gets us into the next area, which is practice it. Give yourself opportunities to actually put this into practice and consciously go through the process, even if it might seem clunky at first. One of the things that I do with my tech members is take them through a script associated with active discovery.
Active discovery.
Well, it's really a script for listening in an active way to help people unpack the problems they have and find solutions. Now, the first time you go through that script, it's clunky and it seems unnatural. And people say, I can't use that term. I change it, but it doesn't matter. Get it done. Take people through it. And I know people hate this process, and so call it something else, but role-playing. Get somebody to work on it with you before you go out and practice it in the real world.
That becomes really important for things like your elevator pitch.
Absolutely. So depending on how big the change that you're trying to make in terms of your behavior is, use different mechanisms for helping yourself to make that behavior change. So role playing or role practicing, actually putting into play in smaller conversations. Don't do it for the first time when you're trying to pitch for a $1 million contract or multi-million-dollar contract. Do it when you're talking to your family. Do it when you're talking to your friends, and see if you can't get some of these the behavior that you're trying to address into your normal pattern.
So you're really saying experiment as well. So practice kind of goes in line with experimenting, yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah, and see what works and what doesn't. And having measures helps you determine objectively whether it's suiting your purposes or not. Because sometimes you have to change course. This isn't working for me. I'm going to have to come up with a different design. How will I know whether I do or I don't? Have something to measure.
Yeah. So sometimes the listening thing is a tough one, because I struggled with that, and it took me a long time. And the being hyperactive thing, I had a little bit of that as well. So I commiserate with this person we were speaking about who knows that they are quite hyperactive when they're with people. These things take time to change. So it might not be 30 days that it takes to get this done. You might practice for 30 days and go, well, that's not quite working, and then modify based on your measures. And you've already got that review and improvement loop established that we talked about last time. That's the whole purpose of review. We spoke about making observations, getting feedback. So it comes into that. And it might be worth noting, before we talked about this review and improvement loop is a practice method in so many different areas. We're applying it to networking.
Oh yeah, I mean, what we're talking about here in terms of improving is the loop that's used in quality improvement. Plan, do, check, act. Really, we're not suggesting anything different, but applying it here as a discipline to your networking practice.
Yep. But if you can practice something, put it into practice and do it for about 30 days religiously, you will start to form a habit. So, for instance, that stoplight mechanism, it might get to a point where you go, I don't need to record this. This is just happening. And then what the measures might change, because you might go, what have I heard from this person? And you start to learn that I can make this notes, recall all this stuff. And then when you try and recall a conversation with somebody else and you go, oh, I don't really know what we spoke about, it's probably an indication that you did too much talking. But when you get them talk, so what I'm getting at is there might be other measures that happen in the future. But the whole point is, around about 30 days, you focus on one of those tasks, one of those things you want to change, and you start to get to a point where it starts to become part of your natural way of doing things.
And you can break it down a bit too, I think. When we talk about getting good at listening or getting better at listening, it might be associated with one particular time that you're not listening. Right at the beginning. I found many years ago that people were saying to me, you don't remember the names of the people you've just been introduced to.
Oh, that's a common thing.
That's very common. And what I found is that I was too busy listening to how someone was introducing my name and whether it was right. So I stopped listening to that.
Were you thinking about the answer you were going to give?
Yeah, something along those lines, So here's the thing. When you find that you find there are problems, you can start breaking it down into sections and, chunk it, if you like.
Yeah. So it might be the intro section that you need to work on when you break the ice.
For a friend who's too enthusiastic, it might be that he needs to talk to himself just before he gets into a situation or an event, so that he can calm himself down and not be so enthusiastic, not be so giddy with excitement. And that might require a bit of self-talk and so on, and find that the rest of the behaviors flow from that. So he's better at listening because he's not so excited to start with.
Yeah, that's interesting, because changing one behavior might change a few behaviors, but you're focusing on the one behavior. So people can relapse, Ron.
Yeah.
when you let's say you're on a diet. Like I was last year, I got to December and I was really happy with where I was at, and I got COVID twice, and then I got COVID once, was in lockdown twice, and I fell off the wagon with gym and all that, and I didn't get the habit back and I started to go in the other direction. How do you stop relapse when you've done 30 days worth of work? What do we do next? What's the next stage?
When we talk about relapsing, well, a good way to prevent the relapsing from happening is look at how you reinforce that behavior.
Yeah. And that's, of course, I was just teasing there because that is the fourth thing that you need to do. Because once you've done the 30 days, you need to reinforce till that becomes part of who you are, to be able to listen to someone.
Yeah, so if for those who are listening and are familiar with the Plan, Do, Check, Act process of quality improvement, this is the wedging process. This is where you wedge the behavior into the way you do things from now on. And I find that things like rewards are a good way. If I can do this for 30 days, it's starting to become a habit, but okay, I'll give myself a little indulgence.
Yeah, that's great. And so you would nominate what that is maybe when you start the process and go at the end, well, I'm going to go out to the movies, or I'm going to go out with some mates to dinner, or I'm going to take my wife on a date. Well, you might not want to do that one. You might not want to align that one with your behaviors. You might want to leave that completely separate. Maybe make it about you.
Yeah, maybe an afternoon off, or you might be looking for that new set of golf clubs, depending on how big the behavior change is. I wouldn't buy golf clubs on the basis of I'm not going to bite my nails anymore.
A golf club would be great. Well, yeah, but if you think about it, if you can make yourself an active listener, that's worth a golf club or two.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's worth a whole set because you're going to win a lot more work if you can listen to people. So,
but here's the thing, active listening is not about one behavior, it's about multiple behaviors. So if you want to become a better listener, think about a number of behaviors you've got to change.
So the really important thing here is getting into that loop to process. The review, improve process that we're talking about with the quality improvement. And the reinforcing is really about going now for the next, once you've rewarded yourself for the 30 days, it's going, what am I going to do for the next 30 days to get to the next point? So you don't drop it. You keep it running.
So you've got this process of continuous improvement. Like I said before, though, these are all well-known processes.
100%.
Yeah.
Do people apply them to networking?
Exactly. This is the point I'm making. What we're trying to do here is get something that is seen as almost a dark art or a natural talent, which is a word that I absolutely hate when people say, oh, you're just talented in that area and it's easy for you.
No, it's a lot of work to get to the point where you're actually good at something and make it look effortless. Someone said to me once, someone really knows about a topic when they talk about it with ease and there's no jargon. It's just, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Here's how it works.
Yeah, if they could I had a friend who was a PhD mathematician. He was the smartest guy in mathematics I knew, not because of his PhD, but because he could explain very complex mathematical concepts to a child.
Yeah, that's great.
So he understood it so well that he could explain it to literally anyone. To me, that's what makes a real expert. That's what makes a real genius. And that's when someone really has that skill or that area covered.
And as we talked with a long time ago, Tony McKay, who was talking about leadership lessons from defense, and we kind of established the idea that to become expert at anything takes 10,000 hours. Now, it's not going to take you 10,000 hours to change a behavior, but the point is it takes a lot of time. And for that to become an intrinsic part of who you are, you've got to keep working on it until it's a natural part of who you are. So yes, you've done your 30 days. You can go to point 2 on the improvement list and start working on that. But the underlying other behavior, you keep rolling along. It should be less work by that point because you've established the beginnings of a habit. As you're talking about, we're wedging it in. We've gone out and celebrated in some fashion, bought a set of golf clubs, whatever. That's a pretty extreme thing, but love it.
Yep.
But if you can establish that, you can then, keep that rolling in a much simpler fashion and don't need to work as hard to get it established. You then can work on the next thing. So you can be working on multiple things at once, but you need to keep up the work until it's part of who you are.
And the whole framework for doing this is by going out there and continuing networking while you're communicating with other people, while you're meeting other people. So that gives you the opportunity to make those improvements on a continual basis.
Yep.
It's just about being deliberate and disciplined.
100%, and being self-aware. And that is the hardest thing about the whole thing. It's about creating structures and frameworks around you that help you to be self-disciplined. And we talk about coaches all the time, but one of the really good ways of making sure this happens, even if it's just someone that you're trying to, maybe there's two of you who are both trying to improve your networking, you make each other accountable to each other, or you get a coach that you can be accountable to with this kind of a process. So the process, again, that we've talked about, how to become effective at networking, you got to establish your purpose. Why am I networking? What am I trying to achieve? Then you've got to plan your networking. So be purposeful about it. Oh, not to use the word purpose twice, but really be clear about where you're going to go, what you're going to do, who you're going to talk to.
To make that purpose a reality.
To make the purpose a reality. And then there's a whole list of things for doing it. So purpose, plan, do, and then review everything. Get into this review and improve loop. Purpose, plan, do, review, improve. If you can establish these things that we're talking about, give it a year's time, and you might be acting at about 60% of your ability at the moment. Next, you might be getting 60% of the result you're looking for. But next year, same time, you might be getting 75% of the result, depending on how committed you are to this process. And the idea is over a bit of time to really become a star at networking, because anyone can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a learned skill, just like just about every other thing that you do in life. Can I improve it? Absolutely. But it starts also with a mindset. Can I improve it? Is it all about what I was born, what I was given with? No, it has to do with how committed I am to making improvements along the way.
I know people who are very introverted who've become great networkers. They don't look to talk to everyone, but it goes against their very nature, and they've become excellent at it.
And it's the same with so many other things. You talk about people who have a morbid fear of public speaking who become great orators.
Sometimes people who are introverted can be better networkers than people who are, as we were talking about, our excited friend.
And this whole myth of natural talent can become a problem. As many people have said, sometimes a great skill or a great ability becomes a negative. So your greatest positive becomes a negative when it's overplayed.
Yes.
So be careful of that.
So if you've been listening, we highly encourage you to put these things into practice that we've been talking about in the last 4 episodes, and today's episode, obviously. And we've got Christmas in a week or so, so we've only really got time for 1 episode rather than 2, Ron.
Yeah. So we won't meet our initial goal of 24, but we'll get to 23, which is pretty good. So we're getting more disciplined, which is good. And we'll carry that into the new year, I hope.
And as a bit of a special, rather than being fortnightly, because we're coming up to Christmas, we've got to move things along. So we're going to have another episode for you in 7 days. So in 1 week. So finally, I've been saying 1 week for a long time. We finally get down to a 1 week cadence right at the end of the year.
Yeah. And we might carry that on into next year. We'll see.
We've got a very special guest for next week. So someone who's coming along to talk about networking. This person is an expert networker, and we highly recommend you listen along with us, and that will be our Christmas special.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that.
A networking Christmas special. How Business Builders podcast of us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like the old Christmas specials of Andy Williams and Dean Martin, and it's making me feel nostalgic.
Brenton and Ron's networking Christmas special. Let's learn about networking just before Christmas.
Fantastic.
Because there's a lot of lunches that are going to happen. Maybe it's a good opportunity to network.
It's a good thing to start putting this into practice right away.
Yeah, it's when the cousins bring their partners along and so forth. Oh, it's a networking opportunity.
Well, just think of all the business networking that's going to be done between now and Christmas.
Oh, true. Lots of parties.
Yeah.
Lots of end of year functions. Networking opportunities galore.
Yeah. Even internally. Don't forget, there's always the internal networking that can be done within organizations too.
Agreed. Christmas parties, internal networking. Listen, we will see you in 1 week. We're almost at that festive part of year. We're very close, so we look forward to seeing you in 1 week's time, just before Christmas.
So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.